Good morning. This is Horizon's Middle East and Africa, our top stories this morning. The U.S. and Iran trade messages over the weekend seeking changes to a draft agreement that would extend a ceasefire and open the Strait of Hormuz. But it remains unclear whether progress is made. Stocks rise to a record as investors double down on the AI trade that's powered equities to an all-time high. Oil also climbs as the U.S.-Iran ceasefire deal remains elusive. Plus, Jensen Huang says agentic AI has now arrived. In his Computex keynote address, Nvidia CEO hails AI as a profit generator propelling GDP growth. It's just gone 8 a.m. across the Emirates. I'm Abir Abu Amar in Dubai. Well, happy Monday. Let's take a look at what markets are doing this morning, starting with U.S. futures this morning up 0.2%. And this argument of equities really forgetting about the Iran war and the Middle East tensions is very prevalent here. We're back to the AI trade. We're back to the story about tech. Now, something that is quite interesting about the S&P, it's obviously up this year 11%. 80% of the gain in the S&P 500 is propelled by 10 companies, all of them in tech. 7 of them are semiconductors. Now, obviously, the biggest two that are contributing to this gain are Micron and Nvidia. We saw Jensen Huang speaking earlier. That is what is leading to this upside in U.S. equities. 9 straight weeks of gains up until Friday. Now, that is a similar image we're seeing across the MSCI Asia Pacific. About 1% higher this morning, already trading, led by, again, I sound like a broken record, the Kospi in South Korea. Both SK Hynix and Samsung have gained massively year to date. SK Hynix about 260%, Samsung about 165% since the start of the year. Now, again, the biggest green we're seeing across the tech image is when it comes to those chip makers. So SK Hynix, Samsung, both trading on the upside in Korea this morning, leading to this gain in Asian equities. Oil prices gaining this morning $93 a barrel, lower than prices we were seeing before the deal came, or talks about a deal came into position. But when we're talking about Brent crude prices, they are higher this morning. Now, again, they've gone above those levels since the first time since mid-April. U.S. Treasuries, the 10-year yields, not doing much this morning, 4.46%, but again, affected by the war in the Middle East, a trend that we've been seeing since the start of the war, really. Now, when we want to look at Asian equities already trading and those PMI numbers we saw coming out of China over the weekend, we have Winnie Su in our Hong Kong bureau. Winnie?
Yeah, good morning, Abir. As you just mentioned, the big story here in Asia today is still around tech and AI. And hence, as you mentioned just now, MSCI Asia up for another record. Now, we have, yes, the Kospi here leading gains, but also worth noting that Nikkei 225 here up nearly 1%. And we have SoftBank Group, in fact, jumping some 10% earlier today. And it's on track to overtake Toyota to become Japan's most valuable company. So it really goes to show how this AI narrative is changing the market landscape structurally. Now you flip aboard and take a look at the Taiwanese market, because we do have the Computex conference going on right now. As you just mentioned, we have that keynote speech from Nvidia's Jensen Huang, but also we will be hearing from a lot of these other major tech and chip companies as well. So lots of excitement, and you're seeing the market reflecting that already. MediaTek here up 4%, and some of these PC names in Taiwan also jumping in expectation for some collaboration when it comes to working with Nvidia on new products and further down the supply chain as well. Back to you, Abir.
Thank you, Winnie. That was Winnie Su taking us through what is happening in Asian markets. Now, the U.S. says it conducted what it described as self-defense strikes on Iranian radar. This comes as Washington and Tehran traded messages over the weekend seeking changes to a draft agreement that would extend a ceasefire and open the Strait of Hormuz. President Trump says his proposed deal states clearly that, quote, Iran will not have a nuclear weapon. For more on the latest developments in the war, Stuart Livingstone-Wallace, Bloomberg's executive editor for the Middle East, North Africa, and Russia, joins me now. Stuart, thank you, as always, for joining us for those updates. Now, we went into the long holiday in the Middle East with some cautious optimism, but things have seemingly gone sideways over the past week or so. What is the latest?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's an element of that, although, honestly, it's been the same pattern that we've seen since the alleged ceasefire kicked off in early April. So it's this constant back and forth. And we were sort of trying to work out this morning just how many times they've been going back and forth on the wording of this, supposed MOU that exists. We lost count. And this most recent weekend, I think, was a great example where we're going into it. Trump was in the Situation Room on Friday. We thought we were going to get a deal. All the moon music was positive, and then we seemed to be right back to where we started. And similarly, with where you led off on this, which is you have these strikes on Iranian assets, you have strikes potentially coming into Kuwait and places like that. Again, it's a repetition of everything we've seen. So it's really hard to tell where exactly we are in that process right now.
Yeah. And you're right. I was seeing those headlines about sirens in Kuwait being blasted. We also heard about news over the weekend about American soldiers being hurt. But something else that's happening in parallel is Israel's incursion into Lebanon. That is the deepest incursion in decades.
Yeah.
How does that affect the broader peace talks between Israel, the U.S., but also Iran?
Definitely complicates things. And it's not just Lebanon. You're seeing the same thing happening in Gaza as well. So, Israel is pushing forward on, I think it was originally given something like 53% of the territory in that sort of ceasefire. It's now at 60. It says it's going to go to 70. You're seeing the same thing in Lebanon as well, where Israel is trying to expand its so-called security zone around itself. The Iranians have made it pretty clear that's a red line for them. If we have a ceasefire in Hormuz and around the Gulf, then that has to extend to every theatre in this conflict. And that, one would presume, includes Lebanon. I think they have said Lebanon explicitly. Yeah. So definitely complicates the matter. Again, not an easy process to start with, but it's just yet one more thing to worry about.
One more thing to worry about, and returning to wait and see and hear back from both sides on things. Stuart, thank you, as always, for joining us. That was Stuart Livingstone-Wallace, Bloomberg's executive editor for the Middle East, North Africa, and Russia. Now, the U.S. dollar is in focus as traders navigate mixed signals, with Washington and Tehran seeking changes to a draft ceasefire extension. However, it is unclear whether they're making much progress. Joining us now is Paul Mackel, Global Head of FX Research at HSBC. Paul, thank you for joining us this morning. Now, I want to note to something in your research. You say that central banks are gaining importance again, and some FX fundamentals are back at the table. Now, looking ahead, what do you think would play a bigger importance? Is it geopolitical events that we're seeing out of the region, or is it monetary policy from central banks around the world?
Well, the geopolitics still very much matters, of course, but I think that the sensitivity to exchange rates is not what it once was. And I think there's definitely a lot of headline fatigue in the currency market as well. So, of course, meaningful headlines will matter, but there's been so many headlines for people to navigate. As I said, I think there's been a certain degree of fatigue that's been coming through. But on the other hand, what's coming increasingly into the frame, we're thinking a lot more about what central banks could be saying and doing next. We're very much getting closer to the point where some of them are going to be raising interest rates in response to what's been happening with elevated oil prices, higher inflation readings, etc. So this, I think, this clash is happening. On the one hand, we're thinking about geopolitics, but on the other hand, that's not going to be driving FX as much, because we're thinking, as I said, what's going to be happening with the data, and how central banks are going to be moving their policy rates.
Now, you also mentioned the U.S. dollar. It's a big part of research, and the DXY is up today, and obviously it's been moving similarly throughout this conflict. But even before the conflict and into recent years, people were betting on a weaker dollar, but it's kind of defied those expectations. What do you think investors are getting wrong about the structural dollar story, and how does a hawkish Fed affect those prospects?
Well, if you look at the DXY, as you mentioned, I mean, over the last year, it hasn't really done that much. It's been very stable. And I think that you're getting this, again, competition occurring between the bulls and the bears. Now, our view has been is that the dollar is stuck in a soft orbit, and it is relatively soft compared to where we were a little over 1 year ago. But I think what's, again, in the back of some market participants' minds is how does the Fed fit into this? And of course, we're still trying to understand who is going to be the real Kevin Warsh. Is he going to be the dove that some in the administration perhaps would like to see? Or is he going to be showing his old stripes of being a hawk? And I think this is going to matter a lot. And I think it's going to be dictating the next big move on the dollar.
Yeah.
Now, if we're right that he's going to be relatively balanced, then it keeps that dollar, as I said, in a soft position.
Well, okay, but sticking with the U.S. dollar, but a theme that's emerged a while ago about de-dollarization. Now it's gained momentum in some EMs and parts of the Middle East. But when it comes to de-dollarization, how much momentum do you think it's gained? Or are investors getting ahead of themselves when we talk about the de-dollarization of economies?
Well, whenever the dollar is falling very fast, then it seems to be a very popular narrative. Again, if you go back to 1 year ago in the second quarter, I don't know how many commentators and analysts said that the dollar was going to be in a continuous free fall, because of this de-dollarization. That ran out of steam very much in the early part of the third quarter. Look, I mean, there's some semblance that this is happening, of course, if you're looking at what central banks are doing with their reserves. But on the other hand, if you look at what foreigners are doing with their demand for U.S. assets, presumably that still requires for them to be buying some dollars. You're not getting that same momentum, as I said, compared to where we were 12 months or so ago. So, yes, it's happening, but it's very glacial.
Okay, let's pivot to a different currency, the Japanese yen. A lot of headlines about it this year. You see it ending the year at the level of 157. It is around 159 right now. Do you think we're going to see another intervention by the BOJ? Is that something that you're factoring in? Or does the market see the 160 level as a stable sort of benchmark?
Well, I think many people are a bit concerned about trying to push through that potential ceiling right now at 160 because it was a very forceful hand, as we saw in the recent intervention data released just last week. But on the other hand, we're going up against quite an interesting period because the Bank of Japan is expected to be raising interest rates at its next policy meeting. And then not long afterwards, we're going to be deciphering what the Fed is going to be thinking about its policy outlook, that is, for Fed funds. So 160 is on the radar. It's causing this hesitation to push through it. But if you get a mismatch there in terms of monetary policy divergence, well, that is, if the Fed is more hawkish, then 160 may not be a ceiling at all.
Yeah, well, that was what we know about the yen for now. Paul, thank you so much for joining us this morning. That was Paul Mackel, Global Head of FX Research at HSBC. Now, for a look at some of the stories that we're following this morning, Berkshire Hathaway will acquire Taylor Morrison Horn Corp for $6.8 billion in an all-cash deal. It is the conglomerate's first major purchase under Chief Executive Greg Abel. The offer of $72.50 per share is a 24% premium to the home builder's Friday closing price. Taylor Morrison CEO Sheryl Palmer will continue to lead the company. SoftBank Group is poised to overtake Toyota as Japan's most valuable company, marking a milestone for the global AI boom and a dramatic reshuffling of the country's corporate hierarchy. The stock is up more than 80% this year, pushing its market cap above $288 billion. And meanwhile, SoftBank has announced plans to invest as much as $87 billion in French data centers, making the country a top European hub for AI infrastructure. Coming up, we dive into the details of Nvidia CEO Jensen Huang's keynote speech at Computex in Taipei. That is next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Horizons Middle East and Africa. I'm Abir Abu Omar in Dubai. Nvidia CEO Jensen Huang says agentic AI has arrived. In his Computex keynote address, Huang dismissed threats to employment posed by AI as, quote, nonsense, hailing AI as a profit generator propelling GDP growth. He also spoke about Nvidia's newest chips made for AI.
Here I am standing in front of you. Vera Rubin is in full production. Vera Rubin is in full production. The supply chain we created for Vera Rubin is twice as large as Grace Blackwell.
Joining me now is Bloomberg's Minmin Lo. Minmin, Jensen Huang argues that artificial intelligence is not actually posing a threat to employment levels. What point was he really making there?
Yeah, I think he's really trying to push back against this idea that the arrival of AI is going to push out traditional software makers, right, as we had seen that stock market rout earlier in the year. And he's saying that just look at how AI has driven up GDP numbers. I mean, if you look at Taiwan's GDP forecast is set to be around 10%, which is an extremely high number for a corporation and not, what more for a country or a nation, I should say. And he also talked about how, if your economic output is going so high up, why wouldn't you hire more engineers? And he said that agentic AI is not going to be limited by the number of people. And so that means that there is going to be huge demand for software if these software are discoverable by the AI agents and usable by the agents. And that's why he showcased this library of AI software that are accessible as part of Nvidia's architecture. And his argument really is the opposite, is that AI is going to drive even more demand for software companies and software engineers.
Yeah, but he's also talked about the latest Vera Rubin product, right? What did he share when it comes to that?
Yeah, he was very enthusiastic about that. Really an ultimate showman up there, making a strong pitch for the latest product, the Vera Rubin infrastructure, which was wheeled out on stage. It was a gigantic system dwarfing over Jensen Huang, who joked that there must be about 2,000 people behind that thing wheeling it out. But he emphasized that it wasn't just it's not just a GPU, right? It's an entire system with many GPUs, CPUs, a software stack, and security system to encrypt data in motion and at rest as well. So an entire system there that is presented on stage. And he said this is the most ground up and ambitious system, a project that Nvidia has embarked on, calling it a miracle, and really also announcing that this is now in full production. And so a lot of anticipation, right? He did mention that one of the most difficult questions is memory chips, in a shout out to NAND memory chips shortage that we are seeing right now. But certainly a huge sales pitch there from Nvidia's Jensen Huang, talking up the latest Vera Rubin model.
Minmin, thank you very much. That was Minmin Lo with the latest from Jensen Huang's speech. Now, coming up, the president of the African Development Bank tells us he's preparing support for countries responding to the Ebola outbreak. Our interview with him is next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Horizons Middle East and Africa. I'm Abir Abu Ahmad in Dubai. Now, the Ebola outbreak in Africa is prompting a broader effort to mobilize funding. The president of the African Development Bank told us the lender is working with health agencies and governments to assess what support is needed for both the immediate response and longer-term health system resilience. Take a listen.
The bank is working very closely with Africa CDC and with WHO, and our teams are currently in the process of assessing how much the bank should deploy in terms of resources to support the countries who are facing the Ebola disease.
Have you been able to assess what types of funding is needed and what the WHO and the Africa CDC need? Because we are seeing a number of funding pledges that are being announced, but not necessarily being deployed. So where is the AfDB in terms of those discussions?
So the AfDB team is working currently with Africa CDC and WHO and also the concerned countries to assess what is the level of support which is needed from the bank in coordination with other donors, because we should not duplicate the effort of all the partners, but rather to focus on two type of intervention. One is the short-term intervention to support the country to face the current situation, and the second is to support the health system in the concerned countries.
Do you know if it might have an impact on growth at this point? Can you assess that?
At this stage, it will not be possible to assess the impact on the growth, but from the figures we do have at this stage, the impact will not be very substantial.
That was Sidi Ould, president of the African Development Bank, speaking with Bloomberg's Jennifer Zapasadra. Now, for a look at some of the other stories we're following, former CDC Director Tom Frieden says the world is not well prepared for the next pandemic. In an interview, Frieden said the current Ebola outbreak may not pose a major threat to the U.S., but it is exposing weaknesses in the global public health response.
Even though this strain of Ebola and this Ebola outbreak is not going to cause a pandemic, it's not going to cause a significant risk to large numbers of Americans, it's a stress test. And it's a stress test the world is not doing well at. I would say so far we're failing.
Nigerian politician Peter Obi will run for presidential elections in 2027, setting up a three-way contest against incumbent Bola Tinubu and former Vice President Atiku Abubakar. Obu's candidacy means the opposition vote is likely to be split once again, ending hopes of a single opposition candidate taking on Tinubu. Now let's take a quick look at markets this morning. Equity futures, S&P turning upwards, 0.3%. Now Nasdaq is doing pretty much the same. Dow Jones futures up. The Euro Stoxx 50 is down this morning, painting a different picture perhaps. But oil prices are gaining the first time we're seeing such a move since mid-April. Now they're still much below previous levels. Coming up, we discuss the rise in oil prices amid uncertainty. This is Bloomberg. Good morning. This is Horizon's Middle East and Africa, our top stories this morning. The U.S. and Iran trade messages over the weekend seeking changes to a draft agreement that would extend a ceasefire and open the Strait of Hormuz. But it remains unclear whether progress is made. Stocks rise to a record as investors double down on the AI trade that's powered equities to all-time highs. Oil is also climbing as the U.S.-Iran ceasefire deal remains elusive. And Israel expands its ground assault in Lebanon, shattering a brittle truce with its northern neighbor. This is as Hezbollah steps up attacks on Israel's north. Now it's just gone 8:30 a.m. across the Emirates. I'm Abir Abu Omar in Dubai. Let's start with some breaking news across the terminal screens about Nvidia announcing new processors for Windows PCs, taking on Intel. Nvidia is also partnering with MediaTek on RTX Spark Windows PC chips, and TSMC will manufacture those Nvidia RTX Spark PC chips using 3N processes. This is obviously from the event where Nvidia CEO Jensen Huang was speaking earlier at. Now, sticking with tech and sticking with how stocks around tech are doing, let's take a quick look at how markets are faring this morning. U.S. equities still in the green, 3/10 higher, and this is really an AI boom story. This is a tech story. Equities have forgotten about the U.S.-Iran war. The S&P in particular is up 11% since the start of the year. Now, 80% of that gain is led by just 10 companies. 7 of them are semiconductor companies. Now, when we talk about the tech boom fueling the S&P, it's really chip makers. So investors are really starting to question whether this AI bubble and valuations in those stocks will burst. MSCI Asia Pacific already trading 1% higher. The Kospi in South Korea gaining as much as 4% this morning, led by its 2 biggest constituents, Samsung and SK Hynix. So the upside that we're seeing there is also led by this AI and tech trade. Oil prices are telling the Iran war story, right? Oil prices are 2.2% higher. Brent is at around $93 a barrel, still lower than prices we were seeing before the Mideast headed into a long holiday last week, but elevated this morning, or more elevated. Yields on the 10-year Treasury is not doing much, 4.47 almost percent. But for more on what is happening and the details in Asian equities this morning, let's check on how markets are doing. Winnie Su is in Hong Kong for us. Winnie?
Yeah, morning, Abir. As you just mentioned, we're seeing Asian stocks today still is rallying on that optimism around AI, especially as Computex conference continue to unveil these new products. Right now, you just mentioned Nvidia announcing this new chip that can be used for the PC industry really has been boosting the PC stocks in Taiwan, along with the Taiwanese TAIEX index here up 1.7%. You just mentioned we have Kospi here leading gains, and that's also coming after Goldman Sachs raising its price target for Samsung, talking about how this memory chip crunch is likely to continue to boost the stock price. Now, you flip aboard and take a look at the currency space, because it is a bit of a different picture as some concerns still linger around the Middle East tensions. We have the stronger U.S. dollar weighing on Asian currencies, the Japanese yen here inching closer to that level. We will be closely watching out for intervention risks. Also, Korean won here leading the declines and underperforming peers, because the rally in Korean stocks really prompting foreign investors to sell further as they have to diversify for their portfolios. And when it comes to China, we got that data around the private factory gauge, still seeing a bit of a slowdown in May compared to April, and that is continuing to show the weakness in the overall economy. So we're not seeing too much of a boost when it comes to the support for the Chinese yuan.
Winnie, thank you very much. That was Winnie Su carrying us through the details of what is happening in Asia. Now, oil is climbing from a 6-week low as the outlook for a peace deal to end the war in Iran becomes uncertain once again. Washington and Tehran traded messages over the weekend seeking changes to a draft agreement that would extend a ceasefire and open the Strait of Hormuz. But it is still unclear how much progress is being made. For more, we're joined by Anthony DePaula, our Middle East energy markets reporter. Anthony, thank you so much for joining us this morning. We were speaking with Stuart before about the geopolitics of the situation, but when we talk about oil flows, what has been the latest that's been happening in the Strait of Hormuz? Are we seeing more tanker movement?
Good morning, Abir. It's nice to be with you. Yeah, I mean, we're back from roughly a week in which the region was closed for the Eid holidays here. And so even as this ceasefire and this pause in the fighting seems to be moving forward at a glacial slow-motion pace with not much change, as we come back after a week of markets mainly closed here, we do see some change. So we see oil's dropped about $10 over the past week. So we're down about 93 right now. So that's come off quite a bit. Coming up today, because we don't see progress on the deal over the weekend. We saw President Trump tweeting on doing Truth Social's various posts over the weekend, but not really saying anything about the progress going forward, other than the fact that Iran won't have a nuclear weapon. We have seen oil tankers trickling out of the Gulf. It hasn't been a huge flow. It seemed to have slowed a little bit in terms of commercial shipping over the weekend. But since the start of the war, we have seen about 29 of about 109 oil tankers that were in the Gulf at the start of the war. About 29 of those have come out. That's still much less than you would see coming onto the market under normal circumstances. But there are those barrels getting on there. So some of the traders are wondering, why isn't oil higher when we've got such a disruption? Potentially, it's because some of that oil is sneaking out of the market.
Yeah.
Some of those vessels have come through a narrow channel closer to the Oman border to avoid Iran. Some have turned off their satellite signals. Some governments and countries have even negotiated or paid the Iranian government to get their vessels through. So we have seen this trickle, but it's really haphazard, not enough really to sustain that recovery in oil prices.
But sticking with the same story, the EU, we've reported, citing sources, that the EU may be considering unfreezing Russian sanctions. What impact, if that were to happen, would that have on prices, but also, just the global outlook on economic activity?
Yes, we've seen oil prices come up so much, and because that price cap by the Europeans is set at a discount to the selling price for Russian crude, that price would be increasing along with the market conditions. So what Europe wants to do is kind of keep a cap on the oil revenue that is going to Russia. But we have seen throughout the war the U.S. ease sanctions on sales of Iranian oil, ease sanctions on sales of Russian oil. So these are programs that were put in place to really starve those countries of capital for other geopolitical and strategic aims because of that blockage of the Strait of Hormuz, which has taken all that oil off the market. We've seen those other strategic goals put to the side as the U.S. tried to get more oil on the market. And what the Europeans are trying to do here is allow that oil on the market, but at a lower price, so it starves Russia of more of that oil revenue.
All right. Well, that was Anthony DePaula, our Middle East energy markets reporter. Thank you for joining us. The war and closure of the Strait of Hormuz has hit GCC economies to varying degrees, highlighting the divergence between Saudi Arabia and Qatar. Doha's fiscal position is much weaker due to a sharp drop in oil and gas revenue, while Riyadh has managed to reroute oil exports via the Red Sea. Let's discuss more on the regional economies and their state with Alia Moubayed, Managing Director for EMEA's Economics and Strategy at Jefferies International. Alia, thank you so much for joining us, making time for us this morning. Let's start with just a general view of the regional economies. Now, a lot of the countries in the GCC had their ratings actually affirmed by agencies last week. That perhaps shows their resilience. But what are we looking at when it comes to the disruption of the war and its impact on headline growth in different GCC countries?
Yes, indeed. I mean, it was quite expected that the rating agencies would keep the rating. But when we look at the assessment, and also it is very clear that the main reason why rating agencies are keeping their stance is really because of the strong balance sheet that most of the countries of the region enjoy. Having said that, I think we have seen weakness in many of the numbers, particularly on the fiscal side, particularly for Qatar. And we've seen some weakness at some point in Saudi Arabia, but much less than other countries. But Qatar has been the most hit, with its fiscal position really deteriorating significantly in the first quarter. However, those countries that have access to the Arabian Sea, like Oman, their fiscal position actually has shown quite an outperformance, judging also by Q1 fiscal position, which has seen a much smaller deficit compared to Qatar, for example. That's on the fiscal side, mainly driven by really the weakness in Qatar is really in the revenue, on the revenue front. But I think given the big damage to the Qatari infrastructure, we're expecting that this weakness in public finance continues towards the end of the year, with much larger deficit, almost close to 9%. While in Oman, for example, and in Saudi Arabia, in Oman we could be in surplus, and in Saudi Arabia in a very, very small deficit. And the other indicators of that we have on growth is that the PMIs have shown a relatively robust, basically, performance of the non-oil sector, mainly also because many of these countries have unleashed significant stimulus packages, particularly in the UAE, but also in Qatar and Kuwait, which have supported their financial stability, but also made sure that credit growth to the economy, another major driver of growth, remains healthy.
Alia, to focus on Saudi Arabia a little bit, because it is the biggest economy and the one that gets the most attention. Its March oil revenues hit a 3-year high, yet we've seen a fiscal deficit, we've seen growth stall. Higher oil prices are good for Saudi Arabia, but do you think that the geopolitical tensions are hindering its diversification push?
Well, I mean, indeed, I mean, Saudi Arabia external position, especially given the March trade numbers, we still don't have the full balance of payment picture, but they really demonstrate the relative resilience of the country despite the disruption associated with the Strait of Hormuz. And mainly, as we discussed previously in your show, because of the exports routed via the Red Sea. But if we look closer at the numbers, we see clearly that while oil export revenues have been rising in March by 37%, this is mainly because of the price effect, which has now weakened a little bit, as your colleague just said. But also we have seen a relative weakness in the non-oil export numbers, but also a severe contraction in imports that highlights the disruption in trade. And I think the ambition or the statements coming out of the government to double down on expanding their alternative trade and transport route, but also positions themselves as further strengthening their logistics standing and credential, would only serve to basically counter the impact that we are seeing on non-oil growth, which clearly, if sustained and not supported by these immediate measures to strengthen the resilience of its infrastructure and reduce the impact of Hormuz closure, will start to hit the non-oil growth and therefore impact the longer-term ambitions that they have for their diversification. So what the PIF has recently announced, the alternative route, the expansion of the port's capacity in Yanbu, the intra-Saudi corridors towards Dammam into the Red Sea. These are also important trade routes, but they will take time. They will take time, Abir. And I think the market attention will remain on where oil prices are in the short term, and really how quickly we will see an opening in the Straits activity.
Right. Alia, thank you so much for carrying us through that overview of the GCC and their economies. That was Alia Moubayed, Managing Director for EMEA Economics and Strategy at Jefferies International. Now, coming up, Israel expands its ground assault in Lebanon. We'll get the latest on those details next. This is Bloomberg. Israel is expanding its military operations in Lebanon, launching its deepest incursion into the country in decades. This is as fighting with Hezbollah intensifies. The escalation comes at a delicate moment, with U.S.-Iran diplomacy hanging in the balance and broader regional tensions still running high. For more, we're now joined by Bloomberg's UAE Bureau Chief, Dana Khreish. Dana, talk to us about what is the latest when it comes to this incursion now, the biggest incursion or the deepest in about 25 years. How significant is that for Lebanon?
It is quite significant, right? I mean, it's been an operation that's been going on for the past several days when we were hearing that Israeli troops were approaching the Beaufort Castle. And finally, yesterday, they issued a statement saying that they did and published images that showcased the Israeli soldiers just outside the castle. This is quite the major blow for Hezbollah too, and it's maybe a victory for Israel. But in Israeli media, they're saying it is a victory. Others saying we're back at the same spot that we were before 2000. And like you said, this is the deepest incursion since 2000. And you know, since the 1983, Israel had occupied almost exactly the same strip it is now until 2000 when the withdrawal happened. Now, this could be a good thing and a bad thing. A bad thing because Hezbollah thrives in these insurgency warfare. They're good at the, dropping a bomb and then leaving. But again, the problem that Israel was facing because of Hezbollah's relentless attacks on northern communities in Israel and, of course, Israeli soldiers in Lebanon is, of course, the drones that are managed by fiber optics. This takeover or capture of Beaufort does not stop this problem, does not end it. And this also comes at the backdrop of these rare Lebanese-Israeli talks in the U.S., sponsored by the U.S. And we saw this week they're going to have another round of talks on Tuesday and Wednesday. So this is going to be very difficult for the U.S. to manage. Israel is taking up more and more land of the Lebanese, and that puts Lebanon as a government in such a tough position vis-a-vis Hezbollah.
And that was going to be my next question for you, Dana. Hezbollah has vehemently refused to take part in these talks between the Lebanese government and Israel. So where does the latest that has been happening in Lebanon leave the state of the talks between Israel and Lebanon and the broader peace between Iran, the U.S. and Israel?
So Lebanon, going into these negotiations, wanted to separate its own issues from Iran. They don't want to be under this Iran umbrella. But Iran has said over and over again that any deal with the U.S. must include an end to the war in Lebanon, of course, against Hezbollah. Hezbollah has proven to be very useful for Iran, joining the war against it back in March 2nd after the U.S. and Israeli strikes, and really putting a lot of pressure on Israel as it conducted its operations in Iran. And not just useful, it is the most important and powerful proxy for Iran as well. So abandoning Hezbollah at this time could be quite difficult for Iran to do. It might not want to do that. And whatever is happening on the ground could be explained in several ways. It could be Israel racing against time for a deal. Maybe the U.S. is giving some time for Israel to kind of finish a certain job in Lebanon. This could also pressure Iran maybe to wrap up a deal and agree to something very quickly to stop the attacks on Hezbollah and the takeover of this Lebanese land and, of course, taking whatever Hezbollah has there.
Yeah. Dana, thank you so much for those updates. That was Dana Khreish, our UAE bureau chief here at Bloomberg. Now, coming up, the SpaceX IPO is reshaping Wall Street before shares even start trading. More on our deep dive story next. This is Bloomberg. The SpaceX is preparing for what could be the biggest IPO in history, with a valuation that would instantly make it one of the world's most valuable companies. The listing is already forcing changes across Wall Street, from index rules to investment products, as investors position for Elon Musk's market debut. Let's get more on the details of that story with Danny Lee, Bloomberg Asia aviation reporter. Danny, talk to us about how consequential of an IPO SpaceX will be, and how exactly is Wall Street adapting to the news of it possibly going public?
Yeah, good morning. So SpaceX will be the mother of all public listings, and as you said, one that could be the biggest in the world by quite some margin in the not too distant future. And this is off the back of a $75 billion of funds that's like to be raised, and an astronomical $1.8 trillion valuation. And it's those kind of sums which are going to be testing Wall Street here. The fact that this $75 billion could very much eclipse by more than double what was last the biggest IPO in the world, and that was Saudi Aramco. And it's as a result the kinds of movements in these numbers that are really forcing these market participants to adapt, such as index providers trying to quicken the pace of inclusion for the likes of SpaceX, and even ETF issuers creating a whole line of new products to let people take advantage, and particularly the fact that there are going to be a large number of retail investors, unusually large, up to 30% of the stock allocated to retail investors. That could really help swing things. So, yeah, there's a lot at play here, and particularly consequential with a large number of companies that could still list in its wake.
So speaking of companies that would list in its wake, we know about possibly OpenAI, Anthropic. What consequences are there for other mega listings being lined up here?
Yeah, well, we'd have the likes of OpenAI and Anthropic that also could test the public marketplace from being in the private market so far. And we're talking about potentially really quite large numbers as well. We don't know yet those kind of valuations, but it's just getting that SpaceX IPO right, and for it to become a very smooth process. And given the likes of these outsized founders like Elon Musk dictating things, that will help not just give enthusiasm for more listings, especially with this AI trade, but also help really potentially spur on a lot more enthusiasm with potentially another big market rally as well.
Yeah. Danny, thank you so much for that update on SpaceX and what it would mean for Wall Street, but also the other listings in the U.S. as we await for more details. That was Danny Lee, our Asia aviation reporter. Now, that's it for Horizons Middle East and Africa. I'm Abir Abu Amr in Dubai. Stay with us for Daybreak Europe. This is Bloomberg.